middle-aged rancher thought he'd be alone forever, until 4 Apache women begged for just one night. His hands were rough and calloused from years of tending cattle, mending fences, and digging post holes, and his skin had the weathered, leathered look of someone who had faced storms without complaint. There were few men, or women, who could match his endurance or his skill with horses and ranch work, but despite his rugged appearance and undeniable competence, there was a quiet loneliness that had settled into Jack's life like dust on an old barn. For most of his adult life, Jack had poured himself into his ranch. The land was his constant companion, his cattle his closest friends. Each morning, before the sun peeked over the distant hills, he would rise, dress in worn jeans and a flannel shirt, and step outside into the chill of dawn. The smell of earth and leather, the sound of the wind whispering through the grass, and the low murmur of the herd grazing nearby were all he needed to feel alive. Yet even in the midst of this natural beauty, there was a hollowness he could not shake, a feeling that, despite all his achievements, he would spend the rest of his days alone. Jack remembered a time long ago when he had hoped for love. He had courted a woman named Clara, whose laughter had seemed like music on the wind. For a brief, shining moment, he had believed he might not be alone forever. But life had its own plans. Clara left to care for her sick mother in another state, and letters had slowly become less frequent until they stopped altogether. Jack tried to move on, throwing himself into the ranch, into his animals, into the endless demands of solitude, but the memory of what could have been lingered. Despite his solitude, Jack's life was not without order or meaning. He had routines that he followed with almost ritualistic devotion. He checked the fences daily, ensuring the cattle could roam safely. He fed the horses, brushed their coats until they shone, and repaired the barns and outbuildings as needed. Every chore, no matter how small, became an exercise in discipline and self-reliance. Evenings were spent by the fireplace in the small cabin on the ranch, where Jack would read old books, write in a journal, or play his harmonica softly to himself. The music, simple and raw, echoed in the cabin like a companion who could never leave. There were days when Jack would ride for hours across the open plains, the wind tugging at his hat and the horses' hooves beating a steady rhythm on the hard ground. He loved the solitude of these rides, the way the horizon stretched endlessly, the way the sun painted the sky in colors that no painter could capture. But the silence, once comforting, sometimes felt oppressive. He would find himself talking to the wind or whispering stories to the horses, as if by speaking aloud, he could stave off the creeping emptiness that gnawed at him when the day's work was done. Jack was no stranger to hard work or danger. Over the years, he had faced wild storms that flattened fences, predators that threatened his cattle, and harsh winters that tested his limits. Yet no challenge on the land could match the challenge of his own heart. Loneliness had become the one constant adversary he could not tame. He had friends among the local ranchers, men who shared stories over whiskey and campfires, but even their company was fleeting. They had families, commitments, lives beyond the ranch, while Jack remained tethered to the land he loved, with no one to share it with. Despite this, Jack had developed a kind of quiet contentment. He told himself that he was independent, that his life was full in its own way. He had learned to find joy in small victories. A calf born healthy and strong, a fence mended without mistakes, the satisfaction of a day's work completed. He found solace in routines that others might find monotonous, and in the knowledge that he could rely entirely on himself. But deep down, there was a part of him that longed for something he could not name, someone to share the sunrise with, someone to laugh with after a long day, someone who could see him for more than a hard-working rancher, someone who could see the man behind the calloused hands and weathered face. Jack's solitude was also shaped by his distrust of outsiders. Over the years, he had encountered travelers and wanderers who promised companionship or fleeting friendship, but these encounters often ended in disappointment. Some came seeking shelter or work and vanished at the first sign of hardship. Others sought to take advantage of his generosity, leaving Jack wary of forming bonds that might bring him joy, only to be torn away. Life had taught him to guard his heart, and in many ways he had become a fortress unto himself. Yet even a fortress has cracks. On some nights, Jack would sit by the fire with a mug of coffee, staring into the flames, feeling the weight of years pressing down on him. He thought about the friends he had lost, the family who had moved on, and the love that had slipped through his fingers. The ranch, as beautiful and demanding as it was, could not fill the void entirely. The stars above seemed to mock him with their endless twinkle, as if reminding him of the vastness of the world and the smallness of his own life within it. It was during one such night that Jack felt the sharpest pang of loneliness. The wind howled outside, rattling the cabin windows, and he felt a desire for human presence stronger than he had in years. He thought about reaching out, about breaking the pattern of solitude that had defined his life, but old habits die hard. He poured another cup of coffee, took a deep breath, and reminded himself that he had survived every trial the land had thrown at him. Surely he could survive this too. Despite the loneliness, Jack was a man of principle and heart. He helped those in need whenever he could, quietly assisting neighbors with tasks too difficult for them alone, or lending a hand to strangers who found themselves in trouble on the plains. He never sought recognition or reward. His satisfaction came from knowing he had done what was right. It was this quiet integrity that earned him respect, even from those who knew little about his private struggles. People admired Jack Turner, even if few truly understood him. As the years went on, Jack's routine continued unchanged. He watched the seasons pass, the green flush of spring, the heat of summer, the fiery leaves of autumn, and the stark white of winter, each one a reminder of life's rhythm, but also of the solitude that marked his days. He often wondered if life had any surprises left for him, or if he was destined to remain alone forever. The thought was both frightening and strangely comforting. He knew the land would always be there, his work would never end, and at least he would never be without purpose. Yet in the back of his mind, Jack held onto a tiny ember of hope. He could not explain it fully. It was not a longing for the past, nor a desperate wish for romance, but something deep inside told him that life might yet have one unexpected gift left. He dismissed it most days, burying the feeling beneath chores and routines, but it lingered quietly like the scent of rain on dry soil. And so Jack Turner continued to live his life on the plains, strong, self-reliant, and alone, yet with a small, unspoken hope that maybe, just maybe, life had more to offer than what he had already known. He rose with the sun, tended his ranch, cared for his animals, and returned each night to his cabin, where the fire burned and the wind whispered. He told himself that solitude was his fate, yet deep down, he wondered whether the world might one day surprise him with something he had thought lost forever. It was in this quiet, steadfast existence that Jack waited, unaware that the events of a single night would soon change everything he believed about life, companionship, and the possibility of connection. The evening sky over Jack Turner's ranch was painted with the soft, fading colors of sunset. The plains stretched endlessly, golden and quiet, with only the distant sound of cattle shifting in the fields. Jack had finished his daily chores, checking the fences and feeding the horses, and now sat by the fire inside his cabin, sipping lukewarm coffee. The wind outside rustled the tall grass, carrying with it the sense of the land he had cared for all his life. Life had been predictable for decades, just the way Jack liked it. Yet that night, the quiet seemed different, almost alive with a sense of expectation he could not name. Suddenly, the distant rumble of approaching storm clouds reached Jack's ears. The wind picked up, gusting across the plains and sending dust swirling through the air. Jack rose from his chair and walked to the cabin door, squinting at the horizon. Dark, heavy clouds were rolling in, and the first flashes of lightning danced across the sky. He knew that this storm could turn violent quickly. In the open plains, Shelter could mean the difference between safety and danger. As the storm drew closer, a shadow moved in the distance. Jack squinted, trying to make sense of the shapes against the darkening sky. At first, he thought it was just the wind playing tricks, but then he realized he could see figures, people moving against the gusts. As they drew nearer, he could make out 4 women, their clothing soaked and clinging to them from rain, their hair matted from the wind. They were traveling together, their pace quick but cautious, as if seeking safety before the storm fully arrived. Jack's first instinct was caution. He had lived in these parts long enough to know that strangers could be trouble. He reached for the old rifle mounted by the cabin door, but before he could raise it, he saw the way the women moved, the weariness in their steps, the way they struggled against the storm. Something about their vulnerability stirred a part of Jack he rarely allowed himself to feel. He lowered his hand and stepped outside, calling to them. "Hey, you folks need shelter," Jack's voice carried across the wind. The women paused, relief washing over their faces when they saw him. One of them, the tallest, called back in a clear voice, "Please, just for the night. We mean no harm." He could see the fear in their faces, but also a quiet dignity. They weren't seeking trouble, they were seeking safety. After a long moment, Jack nodded, stepping back to open the cabin door wider. "Come in. You can stay here until the storm passes." The cabin was small but warm, with a fire already crackling in the hearth. Jack could smell their damp hair and clothes, the earthy scent of the plains clinging to them. He gestured to chairs by the fire, and they sank down, shivering. One of the women wrapped a thin blanket around herself, pulling it tightly against her shoulders. Jack fetched extra blankets and dry cloths, offering them without a word. Once they were somewhat comfortable, the women began to speak, their voices quiet but steady. They explained that they had been traveling for days, trying to find safe land away from the settlers encroaching on their territory. They had faced harsh weather, scarcity of food, and long nights of uncertainty. Jack listened, surprised at how calmly they told their story, despite the hardships they had endured. He realized that each woman carried not just the burden of survival, but the strength and wisdom of generations. As the storm raged outside, Jack moved around the cabin, making sure the fire stayed strong and bringing more blankets and hot water. He felt an unfamiliar stirring in his chest, a mix of curiosity, respect, and an odd sense of connection. These women were unlike anyone he had ever met. They carried themselves with a quiet confidence, a presence that commanded attention without demanding it. He felt drawn to their courage, their resilience, and the way they faced life without complaint. The night stretched on, the storm showing no sign of abating. Jack and the women shared a simple meal, bread, cheese, and coffee he had on hand. Conversation flowed easily, with the women asking about the ranch, the animals, and life on the plains. Jack spoke about the land he loved, about the challenges of raising cattle and the satisfaction of living close to nature. He found himself laughing at moments he had not laughed in years, enjoying the exchange of stories and small jokes. Despite the lightness, there were moments of quiet reflection. The women spoke of their families, their homes, and the traditions they hoped to preserve. They told Jack about the struggles of being Apache in a world that often misunderstood them, the dangers they faced, and the strength they had cultivated to survive. Jack listened, realizing how little he knew of their world and feeling a deep respect for the lives they had led. It was humbling, and yet strangely comforting, to see how much strength could be found in such simplicity and courage. As the storm intensified, Jack noticed the way the women looked at him, not with judgment, nor with expectation, but with an honest curiosity. It was the kind of attention Jack had rarely received in his life. It made him self-conscious at first, but gradually he relaxed, understanding that they were not there to test him or challenge him. They were merely sharing the moment, as human beings do when safety and shelter bring them together. The night grew late, and the wind outside began to howl even more fiercely. Jack checked the windows and doors, ensuring everything was secure. He brought an extra firewood log to the hearth, and the cabin glowed warmly in contrast to the storm outside. The women huddled together, exchanging quiet words and smiles, and Jack felt a sense of peace he had not known in years. There was no rush, no pressure, no expectation, just the simple presence of others who had sought refuge and been welcomed. During a quiet lull in the conversation, one of the women spoke softly, almost as if to herself. "It is rare to find kindness in the world," she said. Her words struck Jack more than he expected. He realized that this simple act, offering shelter, a warm fire, and a meal, was enough to forge a connection that transcended the ordinary. In that moment, the barriers he had built around his heart began to feel less necessary. Jack reflected on his life as he watched the women settle in for the night. For decades, he had believed that his path was one of solitude, that his days of connection were behind him. Yet here were four strangers, arriving like a sudden gust of wind, reminding him that life could still surprise him. They had come seeking nothing more than shelter, and in return they had brought with them stories, warmth, and a glimpse of the companionship he had long thought impossible. As the night deepened, the storm outside began to ease slightly, though the wind still rattled the cabin windows. Jack sat in his chair, watching the fire flicker, and felt an unfamiliar sense of anticipation. He did not know what the night would bring, nor did he need to. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine that connection, laughter, and shared stories could be part of his life again. The women, sensing the calm, began to relax. They shared songs and quiet laughter, their voices blending with the crackle of the fire. Jack found himself humming along softly, a tune he had long forgotten. There was a rhythm to the moment, a balance between human vulnerability and resilience. He realized that the storm outside was nothing compared to the storm that had once raged within him, a storm of loneliness, doubt, and guarded heartache. Now, for the first time in decades, that inner storm seemed to quiet. Hours passed and the night deepened into a profound stillness. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle and the wind had lost some of its bite. Inside the cabin, warmth, light, and laughter mingled, creating a sense of home that Jack had never experienced before. He looked at the women, tired, damp, yet undeniably strong, and felt a quiet awe. They had arrived seeking only temporary refuge, and yet they had given him something far greater, a reminder that life could still offer surprises, even in the most unexpected forms. By the time Jack finally rose to check the fire one last time, the women were quiet, resting in the comfort of blankets and warmth. He watched them for a moment, reflecting on how a single night could shift the course of one's life in ways unimaginable. The storm outside had brought them together, but it was the courage, kindness, and humanity of each person in that cabin that had created a bond stronger than weather or distance. Jack sat back down, feeling an unfamiliar lightness in his chest. He realized that the world was wider, richer, and more surprising than he had allowed himself to believe. For decades, he had thought solitude was his only companion. Now, with four strangers resting quietly under his roof, he felt the stirrings of hope, a hope that connection, understanding, and even friendship could enter a life thought long settled into loneliness. And as the night wore on, Jack Turner, the solitary rancher, felt a quiet certainty for the first time in many years. That life was not done with him yet, and that one night, one chance encounter, could hold more meaning than decades of routine had ever offered. The morning after the storm, the sun rose slowly over the plains, spilling golden light across Jack Turner's ranch. The air was fresh, scented with rain and earth, and the storm had left the land sparkling, each blade of grass glistening with tiny droplets. Jack stepped outside, stretching his stiff muscles and feeling the quiet calm of a world that had been washed clean. He glanced toward the cabin and saw the four women emerging cautiously, their clothes still damp but their faces bright with the first sunlight in days. Jack approached them with a nod, offering smiles and greetings. "Morning. The storm's passed. Looks like a good day to get some work done." The women smiled back, their expressions a mixture of gratitude and determination. Even though they had been through so much, there was a strength in their eyes, a readiness to face whatever the plains might throw at them next. Breakfast was simple but hearty. Jack prepared eggs, bread, and coffee, and they all sat together in the cabin, the warmth of the fire still lingering in the room. Conversation flowed easily, touching on practical matters, plans for the day, tasks that needed attention, and the care of the animals. But it also drifted into stories of their lives, of their families, and of the places they had known. Jack found himself listening with genuine curiosity, learning more about these women in a single morning than he had about most people in years. After breakfast, Jack suggested they step outside and help with some of the ranch work. "It's a big place," he said with a shrug. "There's always something that needs doing." The women agreed, eager to be useful and to learn. Together they moved across the ranch, checking fences, feeding the horses, and tending to the cattle. Jack watched them work with admiration. They were strong, careful, and skilled, each of them finding ways to contribute even without prior experience on a ranch. Their energy was infectious, and Jack found himself working harder, inspired by their presence. As the morning sun climbed higher, Jack and the women took a short break beneath a large oak tree near the barn. He offered water and encouraged them to rest, and they sat together in companionable silence, the breeze rustling leaves above. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Jack realized how rare it was to feel this sense of ease with others, how rare it was to have strangers in your life who were no longer strangers in spirit. One of the women, the one who had first spoken upon their arrival, began to tell a story of her childhood in the mountains. She described running through forests, learning from her elders, and listening to the wind for signs of change. The story was simple, yet vivid, painting a picture of a world that was both beautiful and harsh. Jack listened intently, feeling as if he were seeing a part of the world he had never truly known. The story made him laugh in places, nod in understanding in others, and feel a deep respect for the resilience of people who lived close to the land. The second woman, quieter and more observant, spoke of her skills with plants and herbs. She described how her family had used plants for medicine, for cooking, and for ceremonies that honored the land. Jack was fascinated. He had lived off the land his whole life, but he had never considered it in such detail, nor had he understood the deep relationship the women had with nature. He asked questions, eager to learn, and the woman answered with patience, sharing knowledge that seemed almost magical in its simplicity and wisdom. By midday, the sun was high and the work was steady but manageable. Jack suggested they take a break under the shade of a tree near the creek, and together they sat on the grass, dipping their feet in the cool water. The women laughed and shared small games and stories, teasing each other in gentle ways that brought warmth to the moment. Jack felt a lightness he had not known in years. The weight of loneliness that had pressed on him for decades seemed to lift slightly in the company of these women, their laughter and conversation creating a rhythm that felt natural and good. As the day progressed, Jack showed the women how to ride the horses properly. At first, they were hesitant, uncertain of their balance and the animals' moods, but with patience and guidance, they began to gain confidence. Jack marveled at their determination, their willingness to learn, and their joy in small victories. He found himself teaching not just with words, but with a sense of pride and care, feeling a connection grow that was both new and deeply human. While they worked together, Jack began to share small stories of his own life. He told them about the cattle drives he had led in his younger years, about storms he had weathered alone, and about the mistakes and triumphs that had shaped his existence. The women listened with respect and curiosity, never judgment, never pity. Jack realized how rare it was to speak openly about one's life and to be truly heard. Their attention made him feel valued, seen, and most unexpectedly, alive. As the afternoon sun began to soften, the women helped Jack repair a section of fence that had been damaged in the storm. The work was laborious, but together they managed it efficiently. Jack noticed how naturally they fell into rhythm with one another, their coordination almost instinctive. They laughed at small missteps, celebrated small successes, and through it all, Jack felt an emerging sense of camaraderie. For the first time in years, he realized that companionship did not have to be romantic to be meaningful. It could exist in shared effort, shared stories, and shared moments of trust. Later, as they rested again near the barn, the women began to share personal stories of hardship and triumph. They spoke of family members lost and found, of journeys across harsh landscapes, and of the small victories that kept hope alive. Jack listened, often in silence, absorbing the lessons embedded in their words. He began to see parallels between their lives and his own, understanding that strength came in many forms and that resilience was built not just through solitude, but through connection with others. By evening, Jack decided to prepare a simple dinner, a stew made with vegetables he had grown on the ranch, some bread and water from the creek. The women helped, chopping vegetables, stirring the pot, and setting the table. The act of preparing food together was intimate in its own way, a shared labor that created warmth and comfort. They ate slowly, savoring the meal, exchanging smiles and small stories. Jack felt a quiet joy, realizing that the bond forming among them was gentle but undeniable. After dinner, they gathered around the fire in the cabin once again. Jack picked up his harmonica and played a soft tune, the notes floating through the warm air. The women listened, swaying slightly, humming along and sharing soft laughter. Jack had not realized how much he had missed the sound of shared joy, the simple pleasure of others' presence. The night seemed to stretch gently around them, the firelight flickering against their faces, casting shadows that danced like memories on the walls. As the night deepened, conversation turned more personal. The women asked about Jack's hopes and dreams, about moments in his life that had shaped him, and about the things he had once longed for. Jack, feeling unusually open, shared his fears of loneliness, the regrets of relationships lost, and the quiet hope that life still had something to offer him. The women listened with patience and understanding, offering words of encouragement without judgment. Their presence became a mirror, reflecting back to Jack the possibility of connection, the chance to embrace life more fully than he had in decades. The fire dwindled, leaving a soft glow in the room, and the women began to settle into their blankets. Jack stayed awake for a while longer, gazing at the fire and reflecting on the day. He realized that the storm that had brought them here had also swept away something inside him, a wall of isolation, a long-held belief that he would always be alone. The women had not come to change his life deliberately, but through their courage, kindness, and presence, they had already begun to do so. By the time Jack finally lay down to rest, the sense of connection he felt was profound. He knew that the following day would bring new tasks, new challenges, and perhaps new lessons, but he no longer felt the old weight of solitude pressing on his chest. Something within him had shifted, a quiet, steady understanding that life could surprise even the most isolated soul, and that trust and friendship, once opened, could flourish in the most unexpected ways. And so, as sleep claimed him, Jack Turner felt a sense of peace and anticipation. The women who had arrived seeking shelter had become something more: companions, teachers, and reminders that the world still held wonder, resilience, and warmth. He drifted into dreams with the knowledge that the days ahead could hold connection, understanding, and moments of genuine joy, and that perhaps, just perhaps, life had more to offer him than he had ever imagined. The night after the long day of work and conversation fell softly over Jack Turner's ranch. The stars shone brightly in the clear sky, the air crisp and still, carrying the scent of the plains and the faint trace of the rainstorm that had passed the day before. Inside the cabin, the fire burned low, casting a warm glow across the faces of the 4 Apache women and Jack himself. The quiet that settled in the room was different from the quiet he had known before. This was a comfortable, shared silence, a peaceful pause that felt full rather than empty. Jack sat near the hearth, watching the women move about quietly, arranging blankets and preparing for the night. Each of them had adapted to the space with a natural ease, respectful of his home, yet not afraid to make it their own. Jack marveled at their calm confidence, their ability to navigate the world with grace and courage. He thought about how much he had learned in just one day. Their stories, their laughter, and their perspectives had opened something in him he had long thought closed. As the fire crackled, one of the women approached him. "You've been through a lot," she said softly, her voice gentle but steady. "You face storms, loneliness, and hardship, and yet you endure." Jack nodded, unsure how to respond. The words stirred something deep inside him, a mixture of pride and vulnerability. He realized that in their eyes, he was not just a solitary rancher. He was someone who had survived, who had persevered, who had kept going even when life seemed to offer little in return. The women settled near the fire, and Jack found himself sharing more of his thoughts than he had ever shared with another living soul. He spoke of the years spent alone on the ranch, of the longing he had buried beneath chores and routines, and of the quiet hope that life might yet hold unexpected gifts. The women listened attentively, nodding in understanding, never judging, never rushing him. Their attention was sincere, patient, and unwavering, and for the first time in decades, Jack felt truly heard. As the night deepened, they began to tell stories of their own, stories not just of hardship, but of courage, resilience, and the beauty of the world as they had experienced it. They spoke of mountains and rivers, of family gatherings, and of moments when small acts of kindness had changed everything. Jack listened, captivated by the way they spoke, the way they found meaning in even the simplest experiences. He realized that life, even when harsh, could be rich and full if one knew how to see it. The fire flickered, casting dancing shadows on the walls, and Jack felt a quiet warmth spread through him. The women's presence, their stories, and their laughter had begun to fill a space within him that had been empty for far too long. He thought about the life he had lived, decades of work, solitude, and careful routines, and he realized that this one night had already changed something fundamental. He was no longer just a solitary man tending his ranch. He was a part of a shared moment, a small community brought together by circumstance and choice. One of the women suggested they play a game, something simple and lighthearted to pass the time. Jack hesitated at first, unsure of how to participate, but their laughter and encouragement drew him in. They told riddles, shared playful stories, and laughed at small mistakes. Jack found himself smiling more freely than he had in years, feeling a sense of belonging that was both surprising and comforting. In that moment, he understood that companionship was not always about grand gestures or long-term commitments. Sometimes, it was about the simple joy of being present with others. As the hours passed, the conversation grew quieter, more reflective. They spoke of dreams, hopes, and fears, of what they wished for in life and what they had learned through struggle. Jack shared his own reflections, speaking of the loneliness that had weighed on him, the regrets he carried, and the cautious hope that life might still hold surprises. The women responded with empathy, offering gentle words and nods of understanding. Jack felt a deep sense of connection, as if the boundaries that had defined his life for so long were dissolving in the warmth of this shared experience. Outside, the plains were silent, the only sound the soft whisper of the wind through the grass. Inside, the cabin was alive with quiet energy, the kind that comes from people who have shared something meaningful, even for a short time. Jack watched the women, noticing the small gestures, the ease with which they moved, the strength that lay beneath their calm expressions. He realized that courage and resilience were not always loud or dramatic. Often, they were quiet, persistent, and steady, just like the women who had arrived at his doorstep seeking shelter. As the night wore on, Jack felt a shift within himself. The walls he had built around his heart, the protective barriers that had kept him isolated for decades, began to feel less necessary. He understood that trust and connection did not have to be feared. They could be embraced. The women had shown him, without trying, that life could be richer, warmer, and more meaningful when shared with others. He felt gratitude not just for their presence, but for the lessons they had brought with them, the reminder that life was not over, that companionship was possible, and that hope could flourish even in unexpected places. At one point, one of the women moved closer, speaking softly. "You have given us shelter," she said, "but you have also shown us kindness and patience." "That is a gift too," Jack nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He realized that in giving them shelter, he had received something far greater: friendship, understanding, and the rekindling of a part of himself he had long thought lost. The moment was quiet, powerful, and transformative. The hours continued and the fire burned low. Jack and the women shared more laughter, more stories, and more quiet moments of reflection. They spoke of the future, of the unknown paths ahead, and of the ways they had learned to survive and thrive. Jack felt a sense of clarity he had never experienced before. Life, he understood, was not simply about enduring or surviving. It was about connection, trust, and the moments that made the journey meaningful. As dawn approached, Jack stepped outside for a moment, taking a deep breath of the crisp morning air. The plains stretched endlessly, bathed in the soft light of early morning. He felt a sense of peace and anticipation, knowing that the day ahead would be different, not because the land had changed, but because he had changed. The women were still inside, preparing for the day, and he realized that their presence had altered his perception of life, companionship, and hope. When he returned inside, he found the women gathered near the fire, sharing quiet conversation and smiles. Jack felt a profound sense of gratitude for their presence, their courage, and the way they had brought warmth and light into his life. He understood that the night, which had begun as a simple act of shelter, had transformed into something much greater, a reminder that connection, empathy, and shared experiences could shape a life in ways nothing else could. The women prepared to leave as the morning sun rose higher, their journey calling them onward. Jack watched them pack their belongings, feeling a mixture of sadness and gratitude. He knew that their time together had been brief, but the impact was lasting. The storm had brought them together, but it was the choices, courage, and humanity of each person in the cabin that had created a bond stronger than circumstance. Before they left, one of the women turned to Jack. "Thank you," she said simply, her eyes reflecting sincerity and warmth. "For everything." Jack nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. He realized that life had offered him a gift he had not expected, a reminder that even in midlife, even after years of solitude, connection, and understanding were possible. As the women rode away across the plains, their figures growing smaller in the distance, Jack felt a quiet sense of hope settle in his chest. The ranch, which had once felt empty and silent, now seemed alive with possibility. He knew that his life had been forever changed by a single night, a night of shared stories, laughter, labor, and quiet understanding. He had discovered that companionship could arrive unexpectedly, that trust could be built in small moments, and that hope could flourish even in the most unlikely circumstances. Jack returned to his cabin, feeling both peace and anticipation. He tended the fire, prepared for the day's work, and reflected on the lessons of the night. The world was larger and richer than he had imagined, and life, even after decades of solitude, still held surprises. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, not just in caring for his ranch and animals, but in embracing the possibility of connection, understanding, and joy. And so, as the sun climbed higher over the plains, Jack Turner faced the day with a lightness in his heart that he had not known for decades. He had been reminded that life, no matter how solitary it seemed, could hold unexpected gifts, moments of beauty, and the warmth of human connection. The memory of that night, the laughter, the stories, the courage, and the kindness of the 4 Apache women would remain with him forever, a reminder that even in the quietest, loneliest corners of life, hope and companionship could always be found. Jack smiled, feeling the vast expanse of the plains around him, and for the first time in years he knew that he was not truly alone. Life had shown him that connection could arrive in unexpected ways, and that one night, one chance encounter, could change everything.